All right, I think we can get started. Angela.
Thank you, Alicia. Yes, let's get started on time. Thank you so much for all of you for joining today. Good morning, afternoon, good evening to all of you from wherever you're joining, and welcome to our workshop on domestic climate finance planning and mapping. Thank you for joining this virtual event just a year on from when many of us gathered in person in Madrid for the first domestic tracking workshop on the sidelines of COP25. I hope you're all keeping very well wherever you are. My name's Angela Faulkner, Director at Climate Policy Initiative, and I'm delighted to be the overall moderator for today's event. I'm going to try to keep you all on time and running through the programme. This workshop is co-hosted by Climate Policy Initiative, the European Forest Institute and UNDP. Before we get started, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. We reached out to many of you directly and personally because we know you're actively working on the topic of climate finance tracking or related subjects. So please, we want to keep this as interactive as we can with this format. So please update your name in Zoom to include your affiliation. You can do that with the 3 little dots in the right-hand corner to indicate your organisation. Please also write 1 sentence in the chat box on the bottom right-hand corner of the Zoom screen to introduce yourself and the work that you're doing on this topic. Also, during the workshop, please post any comments or links to relevant documents or initiatives that you're involved in that you think could be relevant for the others in this virtual community of practice. And importantly, please do post questions that you'd like to put to the speakers during the discussion sessions that we'll have. Now, please feel free to keep your video on or off as you prefer. It's always nice to see people and keep this, again, a little bit more interactive and informal. Given the time is short, though, we will be muting all participants except the speakers and those invited to contribute from the floor. The meeting is being recorded and a recording will be shared with you after the event and made available on our website. We'll also share a short summary of the report of the discussion. Now, before I hand over to Adeline, to get us started on the substance and to understand who we have here in the virtual room today, we'd like to do a little bit of a poll that you can all participate in to get us warmed up. We received registrations from over 50 countries for the events, including government reps, practitioners, implementing organisations, partner agencies and development institutions, as well as the private sector. So on your screen, we're now going to attempt, if the technology gods are on our side, to put some multiple choice questions up, and we'd love to have your response, which we'll immediately share back with you all. So Alicia, if you could go ahead and put up those questions, that would be great.
I apologize, it was working 10 minutes ago, but now seems to be inactive, Angela. So I think we could share the questions in the chat if that would be helpful, and people could respond. Yeah. Or
if you want to keep trying just for a second, and I'll just talk through our agenda for today. So we'll start with an introductory remarks to set the context for our discussion. We're going to hear from the European Forest Institute, also from CPI and the UNFCCC. Then we're going to go to a panel, which session 1 will hear insights from country representatives and policymakers about the impact of their recent domestic tracking initiatives. Session 2 will bring additional public and private finance representatives to discuss how climate finance information can help inform and leverage Paris-aligned investment and what challenges remain. And then we'll conclude with brief closing remarks from CPI's Global Managing Director, Dr. Barbara Buchner. So with that, unless we're going to go back to the poll, we might come back to that at another point during the session. And in the meanwhile, we'll post the questions on the chat. I'm going to hand over to Adeline Dantonville to get us started. Over to you, Adeline.
Thank you very much, Angela, for moderating our discussion today. So a warm welcome to everyone to this virtual workshop, and particular special thanks to our participants who have had to get up early or who are staying late on various sides of the world. So as Angela mentioned, last year in Madrid, we had the opportunity to convene practitioners, including some of you present today, to share experiences and lessons learned from various approaches and tools used by countries to map and track domestic climate finance, so climate finance at national or subnational level, such as landscapes of climate finance, climate budget tagging, land use finance mapping, climate public expenditure and institutional reviews, private climate expenditure and institutional reviews, and investment and financial flows assessment. So we learned from these discussions last year that one of the primary goals of most tracking exercises was to identify needs and gaps to enhance resource mobilization strategies, and that these efforts have also contributed to improve planning and mainstreaming of climate action into national and sectoral budgets. Practitioners also underlined the importance of finance tracking to build trust with the private sector and with institutional investors, although more information is still needed to inform and incentivize climate compatible investments. So these discussions confirmed that climate finance mapping and tracking has been a fast evolving field in the past 10 years or so, from early efforts to define climate finance and tag climate expenditure. We've now collectively moved into tracking flows at different scales, measuring alignment of investments to climate objectives, and tracking private flows and approaches to leverage private investment. So this progress over the years really illustrates, I think, the growing need to integrate finance tracking and monitoring into day-to-day planning and investment decisions. At the EU-RED facility of the European Forest Institute, we've been working over the past years with several tropical forest countries to map their public and private investments, specifically in the land use sector. And we've observed that one of the cross-cutting challenges remaining when it comes to tracking exercises is that ensuring that data and results be translated into policy action. And there are several success factors that can contribute to supporting that shift. First, the institutionalization of accountability frameworks and the definition of clear metrics, not only at international level, but also at country level, are needed. Transparency of public and corporate investments into natural assets should progressively become the norm. Tracking approaches also need to take into account domestic context. We've been working a lot on land use, and in that sector, we've really seen tremendous differences in how countries define and articulate sustainability and Paris alignment. So tailored approaches are therefore greatly needed, and they maximize the ownership of such processes in countries. And finally, we need to better articulate benefits and opportunities for all stakeholders, such as improving public revenue collection, reducing asymmetry of information of land use actors, for instance, or helping financial institutions assess the impact and alignment of their investments. So today I'm looking forward to hearing from our various panelists about their experiences in using climate finance tracking as an effective way to raise policy ambition towards Paris goals. So with that introduction, I'm handing over to my colleague Xavi from CPI for a brief update on climate finance tracking efforts around the world. Thank you, and over to you, Xavi.
Thank you, Adeline, for this introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm Xavi Meadle from Climate Policy Initiative, and we'll be giving a brief overview of various tracking methodologies that are being used globally to track climate finance. Can we move to the next slide, please, Freddie? Thanks. So the map that you see here shows various tracking initiatives either completed or are currently in progress by various countries, differing in their geographical scale, sectoral scope, and methodological approaches. This is based on best publicly available information. So in case your organization and countries are undertaking similar initiatives, please type in the chat box and we'll update it accordingly. So the non-exhaustive list of tracking approaches include first, the domestic climate finance landscape. These were initiated by CPI back in 2012, which tracks the life cycle of climate finance flows and has since been replicated by other leading organizations like I4C for France, IKEM for Germany, and EFI in the land use sector. And this provides a snapshot of current project finance flows, which allows policymakers and investors to understand various dimensions like sources of finance, intermediaries, instrument, disbursement channels, uses, and the sectors such finance is flowing into. And the snapshot is often shown visually in a Sankey diagram. Moving on to UNDP initiatives. So UNDP has developed a toolkit of various climate finance tracking methods and initiatives over the years, and they're being implemented in more than 42 countries. And these includes first, the Climate Public Expenditure Institutional Review for both public and private sector, called the CPEIRs and the PCEIRs. And they're conducted to take a stock of countries' existing climate change structures and resources, and acts as a baseline for developing and designing further reforms. Next, we have the climate budget tagging systems, which help the central government plan and identify and report on climate-related budget expenditures. The next are the more forward-looking assessments, which includes investment and financial flows and critical investment analysis. And they help us determine the cost of climate change measures and identify what shifts in investments are needed. And participating in the workshop today are John-Luca Merlo and Tom Below, as well as other colleagues from UNDP, who can share more on the different tools if you reach out to them. Next slide, please. So these different initiatives that I talked about have very weighted objectives influencing what type of finance they cover, what is the framework they capture, how frequently they're updated as well, among other things. But important to note that these initiatives are complementing and feeding off and into each other. So for instance, Kenya landscape of climate finance, which Peter will be talking about in session 1, entailed identifying and manual tagging of climate-related expenditure of the national budget line items to cover the public expenditure landscape exercise. Moving on to the next slide, please. We're also very happy to share that we publish a guidance note for tracking domestic climate finance today, the link of which will be shared in the chat box. So please feel free to download and explore it. So the idea for this note was to provide a sort of a step-by-step guidance on various approaches, framework, and best practices that we have learned when we were developing several landscapes over the past decade. And it goes without saying, it's sort of a living document, as more climate finance tracking and disclosure initiatives like the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action or the TCFDs are getting implemented, the taxonomies and methodologies, which we're also going to be talking about in the couple of next sessions, gets more and more evolved. So I'll stop here and pass on to Patrick Oliver. He's a program officer at UNFCCC's Climate Finance and Policy and Analysis Unit, who will be giving us more updates on the climate finance reporting requirements under the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to some rich discussion. Over to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Chavi. You can hear me okay?
Yes. Super.
So I'm going to be really quick because I want to also hear what the panelists have to say. But at first, I just want to thank the organizers of the workshop and the funders. It's really important. It's really good that we have these forums to talk about the best practices in this area as we move into implementing the Paris Agreement and all the mechanisms that are involved in it. These type of forums will be really very useful to scale up action as quickly as possible, as quickly as we need it as well. But to give a more kind of higher level overview about why is domestic climate finance tracking relevant in any way to the multilateral process under the UNFCCC, I just wanted to give two kind of contextual points. One is first on the level of national level reporting that countries must do or should do under the Paris Agreement architecture. And the second point is more around the work that is undertaken under the UNFCCC at a collective level to understand the stock take, for example, where we are, where we're going, and assessment of effectiveness. So first on the national level reporting, this chart kind of shows the transition that we're currently undergoing from the convention reporting framework for countries and to the Paris Agreement reporting framework. And so in Article 13 in the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement, we have a common kind of rule book established after the Katowice COP in 2018 about what should be reported by developed country parties and what should be reported by developing country parties. And to zone in just on the highlighted red font there at the bottom right, this is where we think that domestic climate finance tracking will be really important to feed into this process, where developing countries should provide information to the biannual transparency reports on the financial support they need and the finance they've received. And in the current reporting structure, there's only a guidance to provide on information on finance received in their biannual update report. So this is just a quick kind of detailed zoom in on where at a national level the reporting is changing and how your domestic climate finance tracking work, and the investments you make in developing these systems and making them as strong as possible can help also in your national level reporting at the multilateral level. To go on then, I also, on the second point, just to give you the context, what is this type of information sometimes used for as well? And so here at the Climate Finance Unit, we support the Standing Committee on Finance, and the Standing Committee on Finance is mandated to develop two regular reports. The first report is one that has been focusing on ex-post climate finance flows, and that is the biannual assessment and overview of climate finance. And that has been under development since 2014 was the first edition was published, and we're currently working on the fourth edition of this. And so that's a view of ex-post climate finance flows, where a lot of the information on domestic climate finance can be captured, and the improvements in methodologies and the coverage geographically as well as technically can be also reflected. And then the second report the Standing Committee on Finance works on is the report on the determination of the needs of the developing countries to implement the Paris Agreement and the Convention. And this is a new mandate since the Katowice COP in 2018. So this will be the first report is currently being developed on that aspect. And as you can imagine, if it's on needs, it's about ex ante requirements on finance that can also be reflected in that report. And the information that is reported by developing countries through the biannual update reports or through the biannual transparency reports in the future can be important sources of information for that. So those two reports at the Standing Committee on Finance then kind of also not only feed into being reported to the COP once they're published, but they also feed into the global stocktake process. That's part of Article 40 of the Paris Agreement. And we're beginning the process now on the dialogues that are part of bringing that global stocktake process to a head in 2023 about where we are, where we're going, and what needs to be done. And so the information from the biannual reports, the information from the biannual assessment of the SCF, Standing Committee on Finance, and the information from the determination of needs report from the Standing Committee on Finance are all sources of information that would also feed into that global stocktake that is undertaken every 5 years through the Paris Agreement architecture. So I just wanted to give those 2 points, national level action and what happens at the multilateral collective progress stocktaking kind of action, just to give you some context about why domestic climate finance tracking is really important, why it's very good to have these type of forums, and I really look forward to the discussions and the panels later.
Thank you very much, Padraig, and thank you to Adeline and Xavi also for those opening remarks, which really helped to set the context here. So without further ado, we're on time. So I'm going to hand over to our first moderator of our first session, Tom Below, who is SDG Finance Advisor at UNDP. And we've been chatting to Tom for many years about all of the work that UNDP has been supporting on national climate finance tracking and mobilisation support. So over to you, Tom, to introduce your panel, which will talk about increasing policy ambition and how to use the climate finance reporting information to support that.
Great, thank you, Angela and colleagues. It's a real privilege to be able to listen and share perspectives from UNDP with you today. My name is Tom Below. As Angela has said, I'm an SDG finance advisor with UNDP, working within our finance sector hub, trying to bring the SDGs to the heart of the business of ministries of finance, as well as the practices of the private sector. A big agenda, but as Angela has said, within that, I have myself been working for 10 years or so, trying to bring climate into the budgetary process within ministries of finance, and climate finance tracking has been a part of that. It's truly a collaborative effort that we need to pursue in this space. We all have assets to bring to bear in trying to take this agenda to ministries of finance on climate, and working across institutions, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, regional development banks, the EU, of course, and key actors such as CPI and others is critical. So again, it's great that we have this opportunity to collaborate through this workshop. Let me just reiterate before we hand over to the panelists. I mean, 2021, at which we are just at the beginning, is a big year for all of us. Obviously, in the climate context, raising ambition, raising our policy ambition on climate is critical, as it is every year, but it becomes more and more critical. And of course, it's in the lead up to the COP with the revised NDCs and the raised ambition that everyone is hoping to see within those. But it's not just a year for raising ambition, it's a year for turning ambition into action. And again, this is a critical feature of 2021. We can't just raise our ambition without thinking about how it becomes implemented. And finally, we can't forget that this is all taking place within the context of a recovery, we hope, from COVID-19. So within that context, what role for climate finance tracking and reporting? That is the question that we need to address. We need to address it if we're going to be able to pursue it with the commitment of the highest level of our leadership in ministries of finance and in governments as a whole. I'm going to just share 3 thoughts on that before handing over to the speakers. I'm really looking forward. We've got 4 great country presentations. All of our panelists are grappling with these issues and making climate finance tracking a instrument that supports the raising of ambition and the turning of ambition into action. From my experience, we have seen climate finance tracking and reporting very importantly embed awareness of climate policy within those involved in budgetary processes. We've seen tracking contribute to a sequence of budget reforms that are important both at the strategic formulation end of budgets in terms of budget prioritization and budget formulation itself, turning away from brown to green investment, for example, in budget formulation. And we've even seen it contributing to resource mobilization beyond domestic revenue mobilization, for example, mobilizing debt through climate and green related debt instruments. So lots of ways in which it can contribute. But I'm going to now pass over to our first speaker, which is Peter Odengo. Peter, it's great to be virtually in the same room with you again. Peter is the Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Finance in the Kenyan Treasury and has been grappling, as I say, with these issues for many years. Angela, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, Peter is having some connection issues. So if you can skip to the next speaker, that would be great.
All right. Well, we'll be looking forward to hopefully hearing from Peter later. But in the meantime, great to be able to pass the floor to Diego Teca, who's the Subsecretary for Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment and Water in Ecuador. And Diego and other colleagues on the panel, we're trying to stick to 3 to 5 minutes for these initial brief presentations. I'm going to raise my hand in the virtual sense at 4 minutes, just to warn you that you have 1 minute left, and then we'll pass over to the next panelist. And then at the end of that, we'll have an opportunity for some discussion and engagement around some critical questions. But with that, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me present my compliments on behalf of Ministry of Environment and Water. I'm Diego Teca, the Secretary of Climate Change of Ministry of Environment and Water. First of all, I would like to thank these event organizers. I'm honored to present Ecuador experience that we have been developing with support of UNDP through the NDC SP team. Next, please. All climate change actions are aligned with the National Strategy of Climate Change 2012-2025. As part of the implementation of the ENC, three additional climate change management instruments have been proposed to the ENCC: the National Adaptation Plan, the National Mitigation Plan, and the NDC. All these three instruments have managed the 6 thematic sectors for adaptation and 5 sectors for mitigation, as the slide is showing you. All the intended action must be carried out through the means of implementation, technology, capacity, building, and financing. At the same time, is the intent to have a measurement reporting and verification system now as the National Register of Climate Change, which can allow the correct monitoring and climate change management. Next, please. The National Climate Finance Strategy is a planning instrument that includes use, enabling, condition, and access to climate financing in order to accelerate the mobilization of national and international financing resources, but public and private, promote a private sector participation in climate action, and define guidelines for the financing sector. According to NDC, there are 5 objectives related to climate financing in Ecuador, as you can see in the current slide. Identifying gaps and financing opportunities to make the destination of resources for efficient. Facilitating access and understanding of the origin and destination of climate finance. Defining the basis for the developing climate finances measurement, reporting, and verification system. Collecting and presenting available information on financial flows. Aligning national climate change priorities to the national, international, public, and private financial opportunities. Next, please. In the last year, Ecuador has had relevant progress and methodology implementation relate to climate finance tracking. The country, indeed, since 2020 is applying through the Minister of Environment and Water and Minister of Economy and Finance for UNDP methodology related to public and private climate expenditures. CPAERE and PCER, respectively. Investment and financial flows, IFF, and climate budget staging. The current status of the implementation is climate public expenditure institutional review. In Ecuador, there was a fair implementation of the methodology for the period 2011 2015 in the sector energy, water, agriculture, livestock, aquaculture, and fishing, and LULUCF. Currently, a second exercise is being carried out and includes all the sector of the NDC for the period 2015-2019, and also incorporate the recommendation from the first exercise in 2016. Private climate expenditure institutional review. In Ecuador, there was a first implementation of the methodology in 2017 for the period 2010-2014 for 8 sectors established as relevant for the climate.
Diego, sorry to interrupt. I'm putting my hands up there just to say that we're reaching the end of your time for your first intervention. We can come back, obviously, to some other aspects a bit later. But just one more minute, please.
Okay. EFF, for the implementation of this methodology, the information available from the initiatives include in the Ecuador NDC is being analyzed, and it was possible to identify availability and historical data and financial flows projection or a cost and benefit analysis, and to define the relevant measures from the country with the energy sector which it will be applied. Thank you for your attention. Any question you have, the finance team will helping us out.
Diego, thank you so much, and apologies for the interruption. That was a really informative presentation and really interesting to see how all the different methodological approaches and technological advances have contributed, including very importantly, as you articulated, to the costing of action within the budgetary process there. So thanks, Diego. We will be coming back to you. I've got lots of questions, and I know participants have been fielding questions to the organizers, which we will sift through and try and bring to your attention momentarily. But before we do that, we're very lucky to have Nur Saifuddin, the Senior Policy Analyst from the Fiscal Policy Agency in Indonesia. Indonesia has been doing some groundbreaking work on the integration of climate into the budget over many years, beginning, I think, with a mitigation fiscal framework being put in place several years back, and climate finance tracking has been a strong feature of their work. So, Mr. Saifuddin, if it's okay, we'll pass over to you with the same system. 5 minutes for your first interventions, and I'll put a little clapping hand logo up at 4 minutes, and then of course we can come back to you again in the discussion. But over to you, Mr. Saifuddin.
Yes, thanks, Pak Tom, for this very prestigious opportunity. Can I share screen at the moment? Can I? I cannot share the screen. Right. Oh, okay.
Can you enable?
Yes, it's working. So you can see my presentation right now. Yes. Today, first of all, for sure, I want to share my high appreciation for this opportunity to share Indonesia's experience in conducting the what the so-called as the climate budget taking. I'm Nur Saifuddin from the Center for Climate Finance and Multilateral Policy, Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. And I just want to maybe just look through what we have done so far. As you are aware that Indonesia is very severe and vulnerable to the adverse impact of the climate change. Most of some of the disasters, including maybe you have heard today that Indonesia very severe in impacted by the flood, landslide, and so many about the disasters and etc. And therefore, we have our government has a commitment to tackle the climate change issues, which implemented and promulgated in the our national actions to national action plan to GHG emission reduction by 2011, and we also have what the so-called as the national action plan on climate adaptation in 2014, and we try to and our government tried to put it in on the table for our national development planning since 2020 and 2024. And we also have some plan with regard to the SDGs by 2070. So it's in terms of the general policy, yes, Indonesia is quite strong in terms of the commitment to tackle the climate change issue as well as on the adaptation sectors. And you can see in here that we have 29% voluntarily by 2030 to reduce our emission by our own capacity, and 41% 41% conditional subject to the international support. And based on our second PUR, it is mentioned that the financing will need at about 250 billion US dollars, around 266 trillion rupiah each year, which is quite high in terms of the financing need. So then we have our initiative. The Ministry of Finance has initiative since 2012, just like Pak Tom mentioned. We have what the so-called as the MFF by 2012, and then continued by the LSS, the low emission scoring and budget taking system by 2013, and we start to conduct the climate budget taking by 2016, started by the mitigation action taking at that time, and until today we have conducted both for the mitigation and adaptation climate budget taking, and even started by last year, by 2020, we started to conduct the regional climate budget taking for 11 regional government.
Pak Noor?
Yes.
Could you put your presentation in presentation mode? We're just having a few comments that people would like to see the text in the bottom right. Yeah, perfect.
I see. Okay. Is it clear now? You can see it clearly, like this. Yes. Okay. So, so in terms of the state or the stage of conducting the climate budget taking, actually it started by putting the national, we refer to our national medium-term development plan, and which is how to say it, interpreted in the government work plan. And in here, based on our budgeting and planning system, so we conduct the climate budget taking every year, which is related to national action plans on GHG emission reduction, as well as the climate change adaptation plan. This is what we have done so far. And as the result, you can see in here, due to the initiative started by 2016 just conducted for the mitigation action. So in 2016 and 2017, maybe you can see that the amount is still not big enough, but by 2018 and until today, yeah, we can see that it seems that our commitment start to be increasing. And you can see in here that most of the allocation for 2020, 57% are allocated for the mitigation spending. And you can see that the allocation, even during 2020, we conducted the reallocation and refocusing of the budget, but the allocation itself for the climate budget are around 78 trillion rupiah, which is quite significant in terms of how we may allocate some portion of our budget to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah.
Saifuddin, just a brief warning of 1 minute left. We can come back to.
Okay. Yes.
Yep.
All good. And I just want to close my brief presentation that as a result of the climate budget taking, since 2018 on March, the Indonesia's government issued what the so-called as the first global green sukuk, which was awarded by eight awards globally. Because its initiative is quite strong in what matters with regard to the climate budget taking to the green sukuk is that the climate budget taking data is used as a reference or for the underlying asset for the issuance of the green sukuk. And we can see in here that even though the last issuance was conducted in the midst of the pandemic, but the response from the green investors are quite strong. That we got the very low coupon rate, 2.3%, and we also got 7.37 oversubscribed during the issuance of the last green sukuk this year. And just I already mentioned that by last year we also conducted the regional climate budget taking as the following action of the climate budget taking. And I will be very happy to have some discussion after my presentation. Thank you, Pak Tom, for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Pak Saifuddin, for sharing that rich and long experience in Indonesia. I think we all recognize that changes in the budgetary process take time, but what is remarkable is how in the Indonesia case you have used your climate budget tagging in resource mobilization efforts. If I added up the issuance of the Green Sukuk, I think you've raised over $2.75 billion of finance for your work on climate. So very interesting also to hear about the subnational level tagging and hopefully how that will lead to changes on the ground. So we'll come back, of course, to some further discussion with you, Pak Saifuddin. So thank you so much. But now, please let's hand over to Sarah McPhail, the Director of the Financial Sector Policy in the National Treasury of South Africa. So same rules, Sarah, 3 to 5 minutes, and I'll start my clapping hand symbol. I'm not sure anyone sees it, but I'll put it up after 4 minutes and then I'm afraid rudely interrupt, but we'll come back to further discussion. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. I don't have any slides, so hopefully that will save some time. Good afternoon from Pretoria in South Africa. I'm Sarah McPhail. I'm a director in our Financial Sector Policy Unit at the National Treasury. From our National Treasury perspective, the focus, I guess we're a bit late to the party, as our focus for over the last 10 years has really been on implementing a carbon tax. As early as 2006, we had an environmental fiscal reform paper, but it essentially took us most of the past decade to implement the carbon tax, which came into legislation in 2019 and then was slightly delayed last year due to COVID, but is now in place. As part of doing the carbon tax, we did a very high level public expenditure review in 2016, but most of the work has been much more recent in terms of climate finance tracking. There's the CPI landscape study that Xavi mentioned, and Jack has put in the chat that the release of the report is expected next week. So we're looking forward to the results of that study. I think what the study showed is that we need to put in place a lot of tools and methodologies for tracking climate finance more systematically. We have started doing climate budget tagging, at least to pilot it. So we're busy developing the methodology. We're going for a big bang approach to do it at national, provincial, as well as local government level. We've had a workshop with over 100 participants last year, and we've established an advisory committee which consists of Treasury and Environmental Affairs, our Department of Planning and Monitoring and Evaluation, cooperative governance and whatnot. We've tried to do budget tagging in the past for research and development as well as gender and infrastructure, and it hasn't been very successful. So we're going slowly and cautiously with the climate budget tagging in terms of developing awareness and a methodology and piloting it over this year to then hopefully roll out in a phased approach from probably 21, 22. In terms of the private sector, the financial services sector is most of the work that I'm doing around sustainable finance. We released a technical paper last year to introduce or to make recommendations to introduce a green finance taxonomy, to standardize then green bond issuances and projects and resource mobilization around that, to develop best practice guidelines around TCFD disclosures, to develop a benchmark climate risk scenario that, again, going for the big bang approach in terms of the whole financial sector. So we're looking at banks, insurers, retirement funds, private equity, venture capital, collective investment schemes. Maybe I've forgotten one or two, but again, it will be a whole financial sector approach. And that's really to improve disclosures and management of climate risk. And a lot of our climate finance tracking, this is in addition to the multilateral and the donor funded tracking, which is done by our Departments of Environmental Affairs, as well as our International Development Cooperation unit within the Treasury. But a lot of the other reforms we've tried to align to our mandates in Treasury, be it a budget reform mandate to make the budget more transparent, be it in terms of climate finance, climate budgeting, or gender budgeting, or SDG for that matter. From the financial sector perspective, it's around understanding climate risks as a systemic risk to the financial sector, and then how does Treasury respond from a policy perspective and from a financial sector regulatory oversight. We see these really as just kind of starting building blocks. A lot of what we are doing has also been in response to disaster management and how we improve disaster funding. And obviously that's around climate mitigation and adaptation, being more proactive rather than reactive. Going forward, our discussions are really focused on the quality of information and the capacity to track flows. We're trying to really departments and the subnational governments to do the tracking themselves and to maybe have a high level quality review technical committee, but we really need to build the capacity from the ground up. We also have to manage expectations from a public finance perspective. If you talk about tracking any kind of budget line item, I think there's an automatic assumption that therefore it will get money. We have severe fiscal constraints, so it's also around managing our public finance effectiveness and our fiscal framework. From a finance and risk perspectives, it's really focusing on quantitative and absolute measures when it comes to issuing bonds, green bonds, for example. We are aware of Indonesia's green sukuk, which has been great. We've done a sovereign sukuk bond in the past. We have not yet done a green sovereign bond, but we have had green bonds issued in our local securities exchange by both the private sector, local government, and some of our development finance institutions. We're starting with climate change, but at the same time, we really trying to incorporate biodiversity issues, the circular waste economy, as well as other environmental objectives. So not only focusing on climate, but understanding that there's a lot of tools and methodologies for climate already developed globally. Lastly, we really focused then on a just transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy, and that for us cannot avoid the kind of social objectives and our kind of overarching issues around poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So our green finance taxonomy under development, for example, is following the EU finance taxonomy approach, because our financial markets are very globally competitive, but understanding that when it comes to social safeguards and social disclosures in South Africa, that's really important around reporting on the impact on the people and communities who are most vulnerable. So as we transition from a very energy, fossil fuels based economy, how do we make sure the workers and the communities are not left behind? I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for those very thoughtful remarks. And I think where you ended is an extremely important point, that particularly as we look at the socioeconomic recovery from the pandemic, we need to not just look at climate, or indeed climate and environment and biodiversity, but also the social justice aspects of our spends. And I think I wanted to start, if it's okay, with a question that's coming from our chat, but also alights on that topic, because we also heard from Ecuador and saw in your excellent slides how you're looking at climate mainstreaming alongside gender mainstreaming as one particular topic of equity. I wondered if we could hear a little bit more from our colleague Diego in Ecuador around how that works in practice, this integration of climate alongside gender and the relationship with climate budget tagging and tracking. Is that possible, Diego?
Tom, here, Christian Lopez from Ecuador. Diego wrote a message saying that for his agenda, he has to leave the meeting. But I'm part of the NDCSP team from Environment and UNDP, so I will be able to answer that question when you prefer.
Well, yeah, please. Can you answer that question? That would be great.
Yeah. So thank you for that question about the gender approach on how we are doing this in Ecuador. It has been a really challenge because the first draft that we did in 2011, between 2011 and 2015, didn't take into account this part of the gender approach. So for this period and this next stage of the project, we are developing an gender index, gender relevance index. As you know, the CPIR methodology has a climate relevance index. We are also developing a gender climate index to address this issue. No, so it's something that we are still developing. It's a methodology that we are right now developing, so it will be ready next month. We will share this information with the ministry and also, of course, with the rest of the Latin American community when it's ready. No, so it can be a really good example from Ecuador how to implement this gender approach in the methodology, and we will be happy to share this with all of you. when it's ready.
Great, thank you so much for stepping in there, Christian. That's great. And I mean, there are a lot of questions coming in the chat and answers coming in the chat, so the dialogue is continuing. We've only got a few minutes left, but I did want to ask one question to each of our remaining panelists. And Sarah, I think there's a question in the chat there that I'm seeing, and you gave a very comprehensive view of what you're doing in South Africa, particularly the importance not just of looking at public expenditures, but engaging with the private sector. And you mentioned the work that you're taking forward on the taxonomy. And I think colleagues would love to hear a little bit more about the connect you see between that work on the taxonomy, following perhaps the EU model I think you were suggesting, with the work on climate budget tagging and the public side. Do you see some connect there? What are the steps you're taking on the taxonomy? Just very briefly. I know it's unfair. Just very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, the one good thing is we're doing them both at the same time, which is, I guess, both a benefit and a challenge. But essentially, we see, I mean, what's really important about the taxonomy is understanding that public finance is so limited, and we really need to mobilize the private sector financing. And luckily, our banks and retirement funds and asset managers to some extent are rearing to go. A lot of them have developed their own taxonomies for their own bond issuances, green bond issuances, such as Old Mutual or Standard Bank in South Africa, for example. So the taxonomy is a lot more complex, I would say, than the climate budget tagging. The climate budget tagging methodology will probably be a quite simple mitigation, adaptation, enabling environment kind of tag, whereas the taxonomy has very specific technical standards for GHG emissions, for public transport and whatnot. But ideally, we should be able to, in the long term, use the taxonomy to map private sector financing, provided it's publicly disclosed, and the climate budget tagging to then map the public expenditure.
Thanks, Sarah. I think that's extremely strategic, and again, you know, bringing together that work on the taxonomy and the work on climate budget tagging could give that full picture of financial flows towards climate, both public and private, which is, of course, what we're all aiming for. We have a few more minutes. I'm gonna ask one more question to our colleague from Indonesia, because there was a question in the chat, which I also found interesting, which was, you know, that there are some very impressive figures in terms of the adaptation spend in Indonesia. I know that the work began, you know, as you said, in 2012 with more of a mitigation focus, but when we're looking at the composition of the budget now, we see a very significant proportion of spend on adaptation. Pak Saifuddin, could you just give us perhaps a few examples of what that climate adaptation spend is made up of? Over to you.
Yes, thanks, Pak Tom. Well, actually, we have like 5 main sectors in terms of adaptation that we take based on our the guidance. So we have some activities based on our Ministry of Environment and Forestry will provide some guidance which activities or project actually to be included in the mitigation or adaptation activities. And based on the guidance, so we have 5 main sectors with regard to the adaptation, which consists of the first is economic resilience, the second is life system resilience, then ecosystem resilience, spatial territory resilience, and supporting resilience, where based on the data like, for example, based on the climate budget tagging data in 2018, that most of the adaptation goes to the supporting resilience, where the second goes to the economic resilience. This means that yes, we do have some concern with regard to the adaptation sectors alongside with the mitigation activities. And if you want some figure compared between the 2018 to 2020, in 2018 we spent about 38 trillion rupiah, and in 2020 we have because of the reallocation and refocusing of the budget, we have only 33 trillion rupiah for the adaptation sectors. That's my question, my answer, Pak Tom.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and also for showing how in the pandemic context the constraints have implications for all spend, including climate, and important that we are all aware of that as we move into the socioeconomic recovery. Okay, we're going to have one quick question, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to spend 30 seconds answering it. I know it's unfair, but 2021, this is the year of raising ambition, raising our policy ambition and turning our ambition into action. Climate budget tagging is, of course, just one reform track amongst many that we're pursuing. But please, can you enlighten us with one example of how you think climate budget tagging is contributing to that agenda of raising ambition? And 30 seconds each. I know it's a difficult question, but hopefully we can make the connect between climate budget tagging and that broader agenda of raising ambition. So I'm going to start, if it's okay with you, Christian. You have stepped into the front there from Ecuador. Over to you, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Tom. I think that get that information or achieve the goal to implement the CBT in the Ministry of Economic and Finance and get that information with a periodic report, it will be really important to develop the public policy, and this public policy also has to involve private sector. And so it's really important to have this information also with the other methodologies, the PCIR, for instance, to know how we are at this moment and what is expected. No? So get that information is really important to raise that ambition. If we don't know how we are gonna try to know where are we going. No? So
very good. Very good. Thank you, Christian. So the importance of having that evidence base upon which to build our ambition through the access to information. I think that's a great example, Christian, both public and private you've mentioned. So I'm going to move over, if it's okay, in the order of the panel to you, Pak Saifuddin. 30 seconds.
Yes, Pak Tom. Based on our initiation in the climate budget taking in the national scope, so we move now to the and broaden the area to the subnational. We have last year with 11 region government, and this year we start with another maybe about 10 new government, which is we expect that this will raise some awareness on the issue on climate finance to the regional government. We try to establish and improve their capacity with regard to the climate finance, and we also may have some recommendation in the future. We expect that we can like link the international funding to the regional, like just as we are aware that our office fiscal policy agency is our NDA in Indonesia, so we may channel that fund. We expect also some other financing mechanism, including municipal bonds and etc. We also have started from last year expanding the climate, what the so-called as climate budget responsive gender, Pak. So we also try to touch the issue of gender with regard to the climate financing. This is what we have done so far. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Pak Saifuddin. Those are great examples, not just on the track of using information, but building capacities and resource mobilization, as you've said. And great to hear that across all three panelists were looking at how to take an integrated approach to climate and equity. I think that's really, really important. Sarah, 30 seconds to close from you.
Yeah, I like Noah's point around the green bonds, and that is definitely one thing that climate budget tagging will help us in terms of issuing a sovereign green bond and diversifying our investor base. I think the only other point I'd like to raise from a budget effectiveness point is really linking to disaster management. And there's such a big focus now on responding to disasters being the COVID pandemic. But if we can link climate budget tagging and show how the benefits of spending on the environment can minimize this expenditure that we have on disasters, then that will really change the dynamics in terms of how we budget and spend in this sector.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for ending on that note, because of course it is effectiveness of the budget that we're all aiming at, strengthened effectiveness. And of course, climate budget tagging on its own won't be able to deliver on the ambitions that we have to deliver on climate policy. But when taken as part of a package of reforms and initiatives, including within the private sector, our climate budget tagging techniques and processes can be part of a bigger picture of reform and ambition. I just wanted to end. There were a number of questions in the chat asking more specific detail on how climate budget tagging is done in particular contexts. We have lots of different resources we can share, and Angela, perhaps after this meeting, we can provide you with some links from our end, and you can provide a bit of a package of information for the participants in that regard. But thank you so much to the panelists, a really illuminating discussion, and I'm happy to hand over, I hope not too over time, back to the organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you to all of our speakers for the first session. Great to hear from all corners of the world on your experience on building that evidence base. So now we're really going to think about how to use that evidence base on climate finance tracking information to leverage alignment of public and private investments and alignment with the Paris Agreement in particular. And our moderator for the second panel is Amalie Amin, who is Director of Climate Change at CDC Group. So with that and without further ado, Amalie, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and it's great to follow such an excellent panel, and really, really interesting to hear how the discussion and how government's already thinking about this in terms of mobilization and mobilizing private finance. So perfect segue into our session, which is focused on how national climate finance tracking can be leveraged to align public and private actor investments with the Paris Agreement. I think, as probably everyone in this meeting is aware, the Paris Agreement, one of the core objectives of the Paris Agreement, Article 2.1c, calls for making all financial flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas and climate resilient development. And this is really, I mean, quite a groundbreaking commitment that countries have made under the Paris Agreement, and really, of course, implies moving beyond thinking about climate finance purely project by project towards a much more systemic and transformational agenda. And how now to track not only finance and investments, but also to track what financial system change is happening in light of the need to make these financial flows consistent with the Paris Agreement. So, of course, in that respect, that means that the private sector and private finance also needs to be aligned with those objectives. Government already taking a lot of action to integrate into their own national systems with a view to mobilizing the private sector. But I think now what we're going to hear is from the private sector in particular, what is what is happening? Is that sufficient? Are those decisions and actions really moving the needle, if you like, in terms of shifting financial flows from the private sector? And what more could be done? And how can public and private finance actors better work together and to ensure that we really can accelerate financial flows as needed? So I'm delighted to have an excellent panel. I apologize that it's a manel, it's 4 men. But other than that, it's an excellent panel of good friends, actually. I think I've all of the panelists I've met and worked closely with a couple, particularly Chris and Cliff. And so it's a great pleasure for me to be chairing this. I'm going to open up by asking Cliff first, Cliff Polycarp, who is the Deputy Director of Country Programming at the Green Climate Fund. Chris, so what do you think is needed? What kind of information on climate finance flows is needed from the GCF perspective, and what are you doing really in light of climate finance and the needs that within the needs of country contexts?
Thanks, Emily, and thank you to colleagues at CPI for creating this platform for, I think, a very useful and enlightening exchange on this topic. So, and it's good, Emily, to be with you on this panel as well. Look, I think from the GCF perspective, our core mandate is to serve the convention and the Paris Agreement, and in that context, as we've just recently adopted our strategy for the next for the 4-year period of the current replenishment cycle that we have. I think we've taken the mandate around significantly needing to increase our impact in countries, as well as mobilizing resources at scale while aligning financial flows with the goals of the Paris Agreement very much to heart, and it's been I think now mainstream across the range of our activities. And I think if you see what we do at the GCF, I think we work to support countries at the end of the day at 2 levels. One is to help them put in place the strategies, the enabling frameworks, the investment plans, and the capacities to be able to meet the objectives of the convention, including aligning financial flows. And I think in that context, that support is increasingly going just based on demand from countries, not so much being driven by us, towards working to increase private sector mobilization strategies, working with the financial sector to literally from changing regulations and guidelines to be able to shift financing and lending into climate-friendly investments, as well as in the capital markets. We've also seen examples from countries where they are looking to us for support to be able to build the necessary frameworks, for example, on green bond markets, and we've heard examples of countries that have run ahead with it. And so that's at one level where we work with countries in terms of providing that enabling support. At the second level, of course, we have a very important role to play through our investments itself. And we've created a set of incentives in our investment framework that will enable every investment that we make, whether it's in the public or private sector, to mobilize resources from other financial sources. And so we come in through de-risking structures, providing liquidity, or by blending our concessional finance with other finance to create the incentive structures for other forms of less a capital with a lower risk appetite to go into areas in the climate investment sectors that they typically would not. So that's at the investment sector level. Investment framework level. We also have, as some of you might be aware, a dedicated window or facility within the GCF targeted at working directly with private sector. And we've, during our first round of investments between 2015 and 2019, where we programmed about $7 billion, about 20% of that investment has gone directly to private sector interventions. And we've made a commitment over the next 4 years to increase that quite significantly in proportional terms with the higher overall investments, which could be about $10 billion. So in that sense, through this dedicated facility as well, we're responding to the demand from countries to make private sector investments where there is appetite for that. And maybe the last bit I'll add as part of my introductory remarks is our accreditation process. As you might know, the GCF works with a number of partners, multilateral agencies, development banks, but also private IFIs, local FIs, and they're growing as part of our network. And one of the things one of the incentives we've created within our accreditation framework is for these entities not only to come to GCF for the investments, and they should, but over time, for them to stay with us as part of our network and do business with the GCF, they're going to have to demonstrate to us that they are shifting the overall portfolio to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. And so that's perhaps another level in which we've created incentives to support institutions and have them shift their investments towards climate.
That's great, thank you. Really interesting to hear how the GCF is helping to drive this more systemic change and impact. So now over to Chris Dodwell, Head of Policy Advocacy, Director Impacts Asset Management. So Chris, what kind of information are you looking for in terms of climate finance flows to help inform and leverage Paris-aligned investment from impacts capital or similar?
Great, thanks, Amelie. It's great to be on the call and good to be working with you again, as always. So I'll thanks for the invitation. I'll just say a little word about impacts. So we're an asset manager. We specialise entirely in investments in the transition to a sustainable economy. So, and our work on policy really is kind of about how to ensure that you build effective markets for environmental solutions. It's a kind of win-win. It's a win for our investors because it gives them more to invest in. It's a win for the policymakers because that's kind of what they're trying to do by attracting private sector investment. And the reason I say that is for two purposes. One, kind of we're sort of operating in this world with kind of live ammunition. We have 25 billion assets under management, and a lot of that is looking to be invested in climate solutions. And the second one is I think it's really important for the people on the call to appreciate quite how much capital is coming into this sector at the moment. There is a huge interest in investing in this sector. It's been demonstrated that returns are there. So I think the sort of the supply of capital is really present. And what we now need is actually, well, where is that capital need to be deployed? That I'd say is what's lacking. So I go back to your introductory comments and taking the Article 21C of the Paris Agreement as kind of the sort of pole star for this. but I think we have to downscale that to the national level. So how the flows of finance, both public and private, are going into the projects, the technologies, and the other interventions that are needed to achieve a country's NDC, and just as importantly, its long-term greenhouse gas development strategy or net zero goal, whatever they've got, and its national adaptation priorities. And one of the issues, I mean, I'm really impressed by the work that people have been setting out earlier in the session, but I think with a few notable exceptions, part of the problem we have is that the policy response at the national level hasn't really focused sufficiently on the investment requirements. And therefore, that's not going to provide you with a clear enough baseline against which you can track your financial flows. It's great to be looking at budgets and considering how to tag those, whether they're climate investments or not. But actually, it is possible to cost up the capital that's going to be required to transition an economy. And I think that's where we need to focus attention. So at the same time, as an investor, what we find the main barrier to private sector, the mobilization of private sector capital, is the absence of credible sectoral roadmaps. Why do we need those? Well, we need those because they're going to clarify where in the economy private capital needs to be deployed into new infrastructure and technology, how that private capital can work with public sector capital. And also those sectoral roadmaps can give the opportunity for the national governments to think about how they're going to attract private capital where they need it. What incentive structures will they put in place? What, call them investment grade policies? How they're going to attract that private sector capital. So that's the problem, as I would see it. I think in terms of a solution, so fortunately, the solution to the first part does lie in the hands of policymakers. So I think it's quite encouraging in the run-up to COP26 to see improvement in the quality of national climate policies. It's good to see ambition being raised, but I actually would say just as important is for NDCs to be much clearer around how the details of how they're going to be achieved. And just before Christmas, it was really great to see the UK publish the 6th carbon budget by the Committee of Climate Change. It's yet to be adopted as policy, but the targets have been. And if anyone takes a look at it, it's a very long document. There's really good information there around granular pathways for each individual sector. But in addition to that, there's a special chapter, chapter 5, if anyone wants to look it up, that actually sets out what the investment needs are for the economy as a whole, showing a massive ramp up of investment during the 2020s, peaking at around 60 billion a year in the 2030s. And also they've allocated that within the sectors. So as an investor, you can look at that and you can see where the demand is going to be for capital, but you can link that back into what types of renewables are going to be deployed, when they're hoping to get early investment, say into hydrogen, what the investment case is for energy efficiency in buildings. And that allows you to focus your attention on the growth markets and to consider which are the companies that are going to benefit from that, potentially make equity investments there, or who's going to be raising green bonds. So that level of granularity is really helpful. Just to finish, I think we have to recognize also the fact that tracking climate finance, I think you've picked up on this already, is not just simply a matter of calculating and aggregating sort of investment flows. There are quite a lot of sort of leading indicators that one needs to consider tracking as well, to check that, as you were talking about the financial system, to check that your financial system is fit for purpose and is going to allow that Article 2.1c vision to be achieved. And I'd really praise the work that CPI started on this in terms of the net zero finance tracker that they've just started to kick off. I think some of the indicators there, not just around flows, but around how one measures execution, what potential role targets have. And then just one last comment. I'll come back to this maybe in a discussion later on, but I think we have to be quite careful about targets for financial sectors. This isn't just a matter of setting decarbonisation targets and then having everyone reducing their portfolio emissions to zero. If you do that, well, who's actually going to be investing in the solutions? So we really need to be tracking in Paris alignment. We need to consider how to be tracking the investment in the solutions as well as decarbonising. So hope that's helpful introduction, but thanks very much. Look forward to the discussion.
That's great. And yeah, definitely come back to that, because certainly we need to ensure we're investing in the solutions as well. So I think I understand we have Peter Odehengo, I'm not sure if I've pronounced that correctly, who's a Senior Policy Advisor in Climate Finance at the Kenyan Treasury, who's doing a lot of climate tagging in the national budget with a view to building out a bond. And so I think I'm going to quickly turn to Peter, if he's still with us, to maybe also provide a few words from his perspective on this interface between public and private, and what information is useful, and also what some of the challenges are.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, I was not able to join you in time because of network connection. I'm in the field in far away from Nairobi, but I've heard what has been said by the last speaker. But I would just like to, first of all, to thank CPI for the great good work that it is doing, both to support the national government and also the devolved government to tag and report the flows. We have been working with the CPI for the last almost 2 years with GIZ to support us in clearly tagging the flows of climate finance. However, when we got a very good information, and as just been said, tagging of climate finance is not a means to an end. The objective of tagging the flows is linked with the Paris Agreement Article 7, and will also be soon linked with Article 9 and Substar 13, which is dealing with the transparency and accountability. We see how the long-term finance can operate at the global level, but also to link with the money, the resources that are flowing in within the country, and also the key 3 elements of long-term climate finance. The predictability of the climate finance, and also to provide money for the private sector in the critical investment areas of renewable energy, green transport, smart agriculture, resilience, infrastructure, and also to compare in to complement the resources that are committed and promised within the Annex 1. Although the Paris Agreement no longer differentiates between the Annex 1 and Annex 2, but there is need for clarity on how much is coming from the outside and how much is coming from within. Climate tagging and tracking is a key instrument to give a clarity and indicators that how much we are investing in the transition to low carbon, climate resilient economy, particularly now that we are dealing with the post-COVID-19. We have done it very well. We've got very good results with the CPI. We are very happy. We are going to publish it. But in Kenya and the National Treasury and all the government outside within Kenya, we have got a circular number 13 of 2020, which is requiring all the non-state actors, including the private sector and also the public, to show clearly and fill a form on how much they're investing on climate-related investments. That is giving us a clear indication to know what we invested collectively, both from the civil society, non-state actors, the private sector, the government, and the project to the 2030 and also the mid-century 2050. We've got a very good result. The publication is coming out, and we will be able to say. Finally, we are also working very closely and now reviewing our Public-Private Partnership Act of 2013 to clearly indicate how most of the climate investments related can now be offloaded to the public, to the private sector to support the government to support the government in realizing objectives as outlined in our upgraded NDC, which we submitted in December 2020. And so reliable technical partner. And I'm happy to see Angela Falcon here, that we have been consulting here. We have local level led climate action. Finally, as a result of tracking climate finance, Kenya has been able to attract $150 million from IDA World Bank to finance locally led climate action, which I led personally. This is over and above crowding in additional private sector resources, because there is clarity on what comes in, what is being used, where it is going, and what the government needs to do. But this is also very important because Paris Agreement does not differentiate between developed and developing countries. So the government of Kenya also is in the tail end of issuance of the green sovereign bond to support the government infrastructure, which is all classified as climate finance. So at the end of this year, we are not only tracking, we are not only dealing with figures, but we are using those tracking and data to influence policy. And finally, now we are now finalizing our green fiscal policy, which will be, whose objective is to catalyze the private sector to support the government of Kenya in financing low carbon, climate resilient green economy by providing targeted incentives to the private sector to come in. And also at the same time to remove incentives that are distorting market like the fossil fuels. So colleagues, we will be able to share with you. Thank you very much on this. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Peter. That's excellent to hear. And well, we're very glad that you could join us in this session, having not managed to join the previous one. So thank you very much. We'll turn now to Nathan Fabian, who is Chief Responsible Investment Officer at PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investment, and also Chair of the European Platform on Sustainable Finance. And Nathan, it'd be great to hear from you. You've obviously been closely involved in the EU taxonomy. It'd be great to hear a bit more from you, how that can help with this this issue of incentivizing and improving interaction between public and private financial flows.
I can't hear anything. I'm not sure if anyone can hear me. You can hear me. Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So it's good to talk to you. The main point I'd like to get across today is that private investors are wanting to increase their flows into climate friendly and climate goal aligned finance, but they now want to know that their investments are in fact being invested in ways that are making a substantial difference, that are actually making a substantial contribution. It's clear that as the market for climate friendly investment grows, that not everything that's being invested in is climate goal aligned. And so this is starting to introduce concerns in private markets about greenwashing. And so with this motivation, I think we've started to see an effort to standardize criteria and terms so that private investors can have more confidence that their investments are in fact contributing to the realization of climate goals. And so the European Union has created the EU taxonomy. It is a taxonomy that focuses on economic activities, and it compares the environmental or climate performance of an economic activity to a goal, to an emissions reduction goal. And in Europe, this is net zero 2050 and at least or minus 55 by 2030, below 1990 levels. And so the idea is that an investor, if they invest in a financial product that says it meets this criteria, they can be confident that a substantial contribution is being made by that ultimate investment to that climate goal. So this is the idea. We're introducing a new level of comparability and assurance into green financial markets. We need to use these economic criteria to track flows, of course. And in my role in the platform, we're focusing primarily on private flows, but we expect that both the taxonomy and the tracking mechanisms will be used for public flows in time as well. And there's a number of types of financing that can be tracked using the taxonomy. The regulation around the taxonomy will track equity and debt and the various instruments that are used to provide finance to those channels. So for example, if an economic activity meets the criteria, it can say it's green. And any equity holding in an entity that performs that criteria, that activity, can also claim that the equity holding is green. If a company wants to issue a bond or seek a loan in order to make changes to its assets and their environmental performance, and that will lead to the criteria being met, that bond can be claimed as meeting the criteria and can be claimed as green. So the idea is that we're going to have a very clear benchmarking tool that everyone can use, and everyone can know whether the contribution of the underlying investment is in fact climate goal aligned. Now, I think when we're talking about finance internationally, this raises some interesting questions because not everyone has a net zero by 2050 goal. If you have a net zero by 2050 goal, then the criteria that you would use are not that different to the ones that are in Europe, because the maths on reaching net zero are pretty much the same for everyone, whatever your starting point is. The criteria are essentially built working backwards, looking at the economic life of assets and the risk of lock-in. And so therefore the criteria are very tight in order to be sure that a substantial contribution is being made. If you had a net zero by 2070 goal, then that equation around economic life of assets and lock-in effects starts to change. And so therefore, maybe you could have some more polluting assets that are consistent with a country's trajectory and NDC. Apart from that variation though, the criteria would not really differ. The point is that once again, you've got a comparable framework. So Europe is working with many other countries through the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, talking about taxonomy harmonization and criteria harmonization in an effort to understand how these comparable metrics could be, these frameworks for metrics could be comparable globally. And I think this presents a great opportunity to all of us. It's interesting to ask, will investors use these? Will it make a difference? Well, the plan is that they are going to be mandatory to use in Europe. So every financial product issued in Europe, if any claim is made about environmental performance, must say what proportion of the finance flows in this explicitly clear climate goal aligned way. So this will be a transformative tool for private capital markets. And if I was an investor and I owned a company, I could talk to that company and I could say, well, I know you've got operations in 10 countries around the world. How many of your plants, how many of your assets meet these criteria today? And if not many of them do, how many of them will meet these criteria in 5 years' time? And how much are you going to have to spend to get there? And how much additional finance are you going to have to raise in order to achieve it? And so an investor sitting in Paris or in Frankfurt can very easily understand how their capital can flow to a climate-friendly investment in any country of the world. So this gives us a great leveraging tool. And once again, green bonds, green loans, project finance, public-private funds can all use these criteria for comparable performance reporting. Now, the EU, I know talking about EU climate finance is kind of a niche issue with this audience, but the EU has set mitigation financing goals for the next 10 years. They've actually produced a number. We know it's around about 300 billion euros a year for 10 years to be consistent with the 2030 target. And we know that roughly 80% of that is expected to come from private sources. And so it's very clear that we need to track whether an additional 250 billion, this is energy primarily, doesn't include transport, some transport. We can track whether that 250 billion is in fact coming from the private sector, and we'll be using the climate criteria in the taxonomy to do it. And so part of the platform's function, this will be my last comment, Amelie, thank you. I can see the signal. We will set an observatory under the EU platform whose job it will be to track the private flows consistent with these goals using the taxonomy criteria. We'd be happy to share, and we obviously can learn from what many of you are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Really interesting. And as you say, becoming mandatory in the EU, it's likely to have a ripple effect across many other financial markets. I'm going to turn now to Francisco Dal Oso Leon, who is a climate change professional at the Ministry of Energy of Chile. Welcome, Francisco. Now, we know Chile, of course, have been doing a lot of innovative work around climate finance tracking, and in particular, you're going to tell us a bit about what you're doing in the energy sector. So over to you, Francisco.
Well, thank you, Emily, for these words, and it's an honor for me to be here. Hi, everybody. As Emily said, I'm Francisco Alorso, a climate change professional of the Ministry of Energy of Chile. First of all, I just want to highlight that Chile is really committed to the fight against climate change, and in this line, we announced our commitment to achieve the carbon neutrality goal by 2050, and a few months ago, last April, we sent the update of our NDC to the UNFCCC, committing to greater ambition in line with what science dictates. To fulfill these commitments, most of the mitigation action will come from the energy sector and the forestry capture sector, among which the phase out of coal power plants from the electric matrix, the energy self-supply and energy efficiency measure throughout the economy, electromobility, and the development of green hydrogen industry, and an energy carrier that will be key in reducing emission both for Chile and the world stand out. It is important that carbon neutrality is achieved in the most cost-effective way possible. And that is why, as an energy sector, we're applying the UNDP investment and financial flow methodology, which will allow us to identify the levels of investments and financial flows needed to achieve our commitments to complement the carbon neutrality roadmap that we developed in 2019. In this way, we will identify the various economic efforts that must be done by the public and private sectors, alongside with associated measures that will allow us to eliminate the barriers to implement the identified actions. Furthermore, we pretend to use this methodology to track our climate action and its related financial flows to comply with the transparency framework that the Paris Agreement mandates in its Article 13. Regarding to this article, last week, the Ministry of Environment of my country submitted our fourth biennial update report to the convention. But not everything is about technology and energy transition. Our finance sector is working on include climate criteria to complement the regular financial and risk evaluation, and different efforts are being made. For example, banking and other financial institutions are creating and using different instruments to finance climate actions, like green loans with low interest rates for people and organizations, green bonds, among others. Moreover, the Ministry of Finance and the Chilean Budget Office are working on tracking historical climate finance flows and developing a methodology to track future flows. And here, the intergovernmental institution cooperation and articulation is key. So we have a lot to do for on and on. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. So, well, I mean, we've heard a huge amount of information around all the excellent work that's underway. And I think I'm just going to see, before I ask any more questions, just going to see, are there any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing a lot of questions, but for anyone that does want to ask a question, please do put it in the chat. If not, I may ask each of our panelists maybe to give a little bit like in the last session, but I'll give them longer than 30 seconds on this question, as what would be the wish list in terms of how COP26 could really help move this forward, institutionalize perhaps the climate finance data and Paris-aligned investment. So it can be your top wish, number 1, 2, and 3, if you like, wishes. And I'll go back to Cliff from your perspective at the Green Climate Fund. What would you like to see coming out of COP26 later this year?
Well, in terms of climate information, perhaps it's a bit hard to say, but what I can say would be useful. Earlier when I spoke mainly about the type of support we provide, but I think what would be most useful for us as we go into countries and try and make sure that we're making the most value-added investment is for COP to, I think, create a more systematic incentive for countries to provide or build the institutions that will allow us to have that climate finance data at the country level. And I say this because when we try and look at how to make sure that our investments are most useful and has the most impact, we're often searching for data on where we can add value, because you don't want to distort markets. You don't want to go in and subsidize where subsidies are not needed, either in terms of capital or any other form of subsidies. And so having, if COP26 were to sort of create an incentive for countries to really build robust information on finance flows, and both from the public side and the private side, and really institutionalize that, I think we'll be able to make more value-added and target investments in the country, and will be to their benefit and to the benefit of achieving the Paris goals. Great.
So it sounds like incentivizing more of what's already happening, given we've heard some really, what is clearly best practice in this area, but really trying to promote others to also create a much more systemic approach towards data collection and management around climate finance and other forms of data, no doubt. Okay, over to you, Chris. Your wish list.
Okay, I'm going to try and sneak in 3, so I'll be quick. The first one is, I think there's a real opportunity for a new 5 years on from Paris, a new archetype as to what NDCs look like. And I've kind of set out a bit of an outline about that, but they've really got to have this clarity about what's really needed at a sectoral level in terms of technologies and how much those are going to cost, so that then that provides you with the baseline that you can track up. I'm looking again at the CCC. Between now and 2030, investment in climate solutions need to increase from under 10 billion a year to nearly 50 billion a year. I mean, that's an enormous shift. We've got to get those NDCs talking in those terms, so we can really start to track whether we're doing what we say. Secondly, I think Nathan's right to focus on, I think he was a bit too diplomatic to say it, but to focus on greenwash. And we need to have mechanisms to ensure that investments are really going into things that are going to make a difference, rather than going in what effectively is just recasting business as usual. But as part of that, I would say that don't don't be fooled by just those net zero targets that actually end up being underpinned by a whole load of offsetting emissions or something like that. So let's really make sure that targets mean investing in solutions. And lastly, and definitely not least, we must see a scaling up of investment into adaptation and resilience. We just don't have the systems at the moment to cost that properly. And I know, Emily, you're also involved. The Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment is a really good example of a way to try to change that in terms of encouraging investment at early stage in projects in CapEx so that you can reduce OpEx, and you do that by changing cash flow analysis. So that's one of the ways. We've also started to look at how you can classify, doing a sort of taxonomy approach for adaptation solutions. And I think the EU taxonomy does that, but we must try to increase more effort on focusing on investment in solutions on the adaptation side and make that part of our operation as usual. So sorry if it's 3, but they're good wishes.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with 3. 3 is a good number. And thanks for bringing that point, because I fully agree. I mean, that's something we at CDC are very focused on at the moment, how to increase investment in adaptation and resilience. Very challenging, but so urgent. So I'm going to come now to Nathan. What's your COP26 wish list? Either your top 1 or top 3?
My top wish is that countries and financial regulators make a commitment on using transparent criteria for all their financial flows reporting. So every financial issuance forever from now on should articulate the contribution to climate goals. And when it comes to tracking climate finance, we need transparency on the criteria and comparability. Now, I think there's always room to move when countries have different goals and different speeds of economic adjustment. That is a fact of life. But comparable frameworks are important, and I think countries have the power to agree this. So they're my 2 asks. Can I use my 3rd space just to say the taxonomy at this space doesn't consider natural gas green? Just by the way, there's a comment in the chat. There is a very big political push to change that, I can tell you. But at this stage, the criteria do not include gas as green. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, and thanks very much for responding to that question in the chat. So Francisco, over to you. And it's interesting because also Chile's obviously host of, or has been the co-chair of the Minister of Finance Coalition, and which actually I think for the first time at COP25, obviously which Chile was hosting, provided, I think, a real sense of, these kinds of conversations and these kind of issues now on the agenda of ministries of finance. Of course, COVID, may have slowed it down a little bit, but, it'd be great if particularly Nathan's points could be picked up. But Francisco, you don't have to speak on behalf of the coalition. Please, if you could give us your top, either your top wish or top 3 wishes.
Yeah, yes, of course. I think that my top wish is that the Paris Agreement rulebook be approved at this COP. I think that is it's everything that every party is looking for, and we need the rulebook to start mobilizing climate action in every sector, not only technological sector but also the finance sector. Another wish, maybe it is important what parties may announce about raising their ambition and committing to carbon neutrality before mid-century, and all the financial efforts that they can be done. Maybe the green financial coalition that you mentioned could be like, or play a main role in that part. Particularly, I think that we need more efforts to increase the level and robustness of information by using tools that helps planning a jurisdiction financial flows, the investment and financial flows methodology or others needed to aim our global climate goals for both mitigation and adaptation with a high level of participation and commitment from the private sector. And that last part I think is key, because one thing maybe is what the public sector wants to do, but without the private sector, nothing can be done. So those
Thank
are
you,
my
Francis.
wishes.
Thank you so much. So I think, I mean, it's been an incredibly useful conversation. I hope everyone in the session has, really benefited in hearing from our different finance practitioners and governments on this agenda. And I mean, a great set of wish lists. So we just now need to work together to make them happen, really, don't we? So I'm not going to provide any more of a summary because I'm delighted to, well, I guess hand back to Angela. I'm delighted to hand back to Angela, but also to Barbara, who no doubt will give us a very good closing to the session. Thanks a lot to the panelists, and thank you to CPI for the opportunity to join you.
Thank you very much, Amal Lee, for excellent moderation, and to all of the speakers for the really rich discussion. Yes, handing over to Barbara to conclude final remarks. Barbara is our Global Managing Director at Climate Policy Initiative. Over to you, Barbara.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to everyone here. Thank you to all of discussion. It was really exciting to listen to you, and I'm trying to really do the honor here and come up with some of the main key findings that I at least have had from this discussion here. But let me also thank all the participants for your very active participation and for sharing. Again, I think I can speak on behalf of all the organizers here, SPI, UNDP, and EFI. We're very happy to be able to continue to bring this community of practice together, to develop and to share metrics, methodologies, tools, best practices, and also the results from some of the national and subnational tracking efforts. Again, I think what is very nice from the last time when we met in Madrid, there is even more organizations involved every year in finance tracking. This discussion has shown that again, that also there is a clear need for this discussion. So I think what we are also seeing is that all these organizations are going much deeper into the topic of alignment, of private commitments, and I think that is something which is very welcome. So again, thanks to all of you, and let me also use this opportunity to thank the German government for generously supporting CPI's climate finance tracking work over the past 3 years, including hosting events such like this one. As again, just a few key takeaways from today's discussion. I think what I've heard very clearly is that assessing progress under the Paris Agreement will be impossible without proper systems to track climate expenditures and investments being made by the full range of public and private actors. I think we've heard that from our speakers from Ecuador, from Indonesia, from South Africa, Chile, and Kenya. Again, if countries are to achieve timely their NDCs and reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, we know that ambitions need to be set high, now, hopefully in this year of ambition, and more details are required regarding clear roadmaps and comparable criteria and frameworks. I think what I've heard also is that there is agreement that tracking climate finance is the basis for monitoring action, but also for understanding which capacities and incentives are needed to build right now in order to mobilize investments. And I think Chris made obviously also the very important point that we need a more effective national policy response as well. We've also indeed heard that harmonized approaches and standardized criteria and benchmarks to identify climate-aligned finance will help countries, will help financial institutions and companies to understand what has to be funded as a priority, where and when, and also how. And again, I think Nathan has been mentioning that and making very clearly in the context of the EU taxonomy. I think again, all that is even more evident today. I think the COVID-19 crisis is a wake-up call on the need to manage climate risk before it threatens our global systems. But I think what we've also heard today is that information at the moment still remains fragmented. We need better information, more detailed information to inform organizations' investments and policy decisions. And let me just make a little plug here for an initiative that Chris already has kindly referred to, an effort in which we are continuing tracking climate finance flows at the national and global level to understand how much finance is already flowing. But at the same time, we're also starting to track the flip side and continued investment in high carbon investments that threaten to undermine progress And we're also focusing to work with others to develop this net zero finance tracker at the global and national level, focused on assessing real progress comprehensively with the Paris alignment across the financial and policy system. So again, I think the conversation both on the panels and the vibrant exchange in the chat box has once again shown that there are great wish lists. I really enjoyed the wish list from the last panel, but also clear opportunities for coordination and collaboration on harmonized approaches and on robust information systems, on creating more systemic incentives at the country level, ensuring the effectiveness of finance and also avoiding greenwashing, and a more focus on adaptation and resilience. So we do hope that the insights, the key takeaways from today's discussion will feed into ongoing discussions on international processes ahead of COP26, just to ensure that investments going forward really are aligned with the Paris Agreement and set up for clear ambition, which is so much needed, as we all know. So let me just maybe close by thanking our co-organizers, EFI and UNDP, obviously my colleagues, my team at CPI, for the great organization of the event today. And let me just again also thank our super moderators and the speakers. Please stay safe and stay well. In person, and again, I do thank you for all your efforts and your action in this space, and look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. So with that, I'm going to close here, and I'm going to thank everyone, and I wish you all a very nice day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Angela, thanks so much to everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. And yes, have a good day, rest of your day. Thank you for joining, and we'll share a recording and a summary report of the event. So thanks so much to all of you for joining the discussion. Let's continue it. Thank you.
Thank you all for good presentations. Great. Done. Udah Dharma. Mam, kuchonjo. Yes, I know we came here without a mask. It's difficult, and it is